What's up, guys? We're going to do part 3 of the first principle. Everything is just math. And today I'm going to go over a little bit of food math for you. So, the adult diet, average American adult diet daily, we consume about 3,300 calories and about 90 grams of protein, which is significantly higher than the minimum recommended by the USDA, FDA. So, daily, if we consume 3,300 calories, 90 grams of protein, that would be 360 calories coming from the protein. So the remaining split between the carbs and fat would be about 164 grams of fat and 367 grams of carbs. So this is what the macros look like for the average American adult daily. The average body weight for a female in America right now is 170. Which means the estimated total daily energy expenditure from that female is going to be somewhere around 2,210. So if we're on average consuming 3,300 calories per day, and the average woman is burning 2,210, that would be plus an extra 1,100 calories per day, which would equate to like 2.5, 3 pounds of body weight literally every single week. And that's not happening right now. We know that for sure. So we're going to change these numbers up because this isn't close enough to being accurate. If the average woman is obviously lighter than the average male, it was by about 25 or 30 pounds, and the total daily energy expenditure was 2,210. I just dropped all the average calories because when I was pulling them off the internet from looking them up, they were not giving us male versus female and the average consumed. So I restructured the macros just because this is an example. Remember, none of these are literal numbers. This isn't a specific person that we're measuring here. We are showing you a concept. So I changed, for our example, the daily calories to 2,640, dropped the protein by an equal amount, or all the macros by an equal amount ratio. So 72 grams of protein, 294 grams of carbs, 131 grams of fat, which these numbers are pretty close. Now, if we take this person to do our everything is just math and food math. This is what they're consuming right now. If we help them and they start applying some of our principles, like eat 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, that person changes it to 170 grams, zero point 0.4 grams of fat per pound of body weight, which would take it to about 68 grams of fat. Aim for 30 grams of fiber per day, and then the remaining caloric needs would come from carbs. Now, they can come from any combination of proteins, carbs, and fats at that point. Doesn't matter. We just want to hit these minimums: fiber, fat, and protein to make sure we are as healthy as we can be. The rest of it can come from any combination you want. But if we did 275 grams of carbohydrate, that would put us at 2,210 calories per day consumed, which would match the total daily energy expenditure. That's the beginning part. So let's take this person's diet from right here and start applying some simple math to some simple swaps. If they increase their protein by 100 grams to go from about 72 to about 170, protein has the highest thermic effect of food, meaning the amount of calories that get burnt off from the process of digesting and breaking it down, which is on average about 20 to 30%. So if you add an additional 100 grams of protein, you're going to burn off an additional 100 calories per day just from the thermic effect of food. Increasing your protein burnt calories out by that much. If we do something like swapping high density food options for low density food options, which comes from most of the things that are going to help us get to our fiber target, but increasing our fruits and vegetables, which we talk about a lot, you're going to feel fuller if you choose low density options versus high density options on 50% less food calorically. And the reason for that is your satiation is not mostly based on how calorically dense the food is that you're consuming. It's about the physical stretch response of the stomach. So if you keep eating a ton of spinach, your stomach eventually would stretch and you'd feel full from eating so much spinach or spinach and broccoli, but the total calories would be far less than if you ate whatever number of miniature Snickers or candy bars that are available on Halloween. You could eat a lot more of those calorically before you felt full. So it's the stretch response from the stomach that would be one of the biggest factors there to tell you you're full. So if you swap high density foods for low density options, you'll feel fuller on 50% less food overall. So assuming the average person consumes about 50% of their total food, and I took this and did total fats and carbs from high density options, and they did that swap, they could reduce their total intake of carbs and fats by at least 25% overall, which would be 430 less calories consumed per day, not feeling hungry. And that's easy if you look at somebody eating, a sandwich and or a burger and fries, and they swap that out for a pile of vegetables to go with whatever they're eating. The amount of food that they would feel happy and full and satisfied on would plummet, and they would feel good. They would feel totally fine. They wouldn't feel deprived if they were consuming a massive amount of vegetables. They would be able to cut their calories down by that much and feel less hungry. If you swap high processed options for low processed options, think of oats, grains, breads, things like that, the lower, less processed options have a 1.8 times greater on average thermic effect of food than their more processed counterparts. And you also feel fuller on less food when you choose less processed options. That's what we know for sure. So, assuming the average person consumes about 50% of the carbs and fats that they're eating from high processed options, and I took just the remaining after the first swap. So, this is just the leftovers from the two swaps. If they did that, they'd probably burn an additional 60 calories per day from the thermic effect of food, and or they would continue to consume less food and still feel full and happy. But I didn't double down on that. I just used these numbers here as the remaining from the previous swap. If you front load your calories throughout the day, front loaded dieters, when calories and exercise and macros are equated across the board, in one particularly good study, lost twice as much weight, lost twice as many inches around the waist, and reported significantly less hunger, significantly fewer cravings, and significantly higher energy levels than their counterparts when everything was equated. They just had a much easier job, and the output was significantly better, even though the calories were equated and the exercise routine was the same and the macros were equated. And front loaded dieting just means that you consume most of your calories early in the day. It says early in the morning on the screen, but just early in the day. Eat more at the beginning of the day and then lesser as you go through, versus the counterpart, which was backloaded calories. They'd skip breakfast, so they start with a small breakfast, then a moderately sized lunch, and then eat a ton of calories at the end of the day. Assume that the difference in the weight loss, the results of that study, because calories were equated and macros were equated and the exercise routines weren't changed, we're going to assume that the differences in the end result were coming from the less hunger, the fewer cravings, so adherence was likely greater, and the significantly higher energy levels throughout the day probably led to higher outputs for both non-exercise activity and exercise activities. How many calories did you burn from NEAT and exercise? So your workouts were more productive and you just had more energy throughout the day, so you were burning it out. That would account, just from these assumed changes, for about an additional 300 calories per day. Remember, NEAT is a very, very, very dominating factor here. And then from the exercise, they just had more energy to push harder and do better. Greater adherence and ease to a diet because you feel full, you have less cravings, you have more energy, would account for roughly 500 to 1,000 calories per week of indulgence when you're dieting. And it would be a far greater reduction if you're not dieting, for people that are just consuming a lot in general. If they're trying to be restrictive and then they break their rules or cheat on their diet every once in a while, it would be this, but that number would grow for people that are not trying to adhere to anything at all. So those would be pretty large effects. So if we look back at the quick changes that we just discussed, we increased the protein intake, we did less dense food options, less processed food options, and we front loaded our calories. So this is all the same person, same math, same meal, same structure. We just shifted around the food options that are on the plate and the schedule. There's no rules here. Didn't say eat this, don't eat this, don't do that, do this, whatever. You didn't even weigh calories. So there's no actual measuring of you. You just swap some options. That's what's significant here. The new math for this same person: calories consumed, because they're mindlessly consuming this many calories, boom, went from 2,640 to 2,110, feeling the exact same amount of fullness, but higher energy, as we discussed. Protein went from 72 to 170 grams. Carbs from here, just because went from 294 to under 200. Not that we really care. Fats went from 131 down to under 90, but remember those were flexible. Not that we necessarily are worried about total numbers of carbs and total numbers of fats, it's just relative. Point is that this is what naturally happened for a person without really much deliberate effort and knowing numbers and know MyFitnessPal or anything, just from those swaps. Calories expended, remember their total daily energy expenditure was around 2,210. It went up to 2,670, both from the thermic effect food and then from their exercise activity calories burned and then their neat non-exercise activity. So their new math equation would look like this: 2,110 calories in, 2,670 calories out, which would be a difference or a deficit of about 560 per day. So that's about 1 pound of week, 1 pound per week of total fat loss, little or no lean mass loss, because the increase in protein and the activity level continued to stay high. So they were consuming enough protein to initiate muscle protein synthesis, which allowed them to continuously repair and build while they were in a deficit and losing weight. And at this rate of weight loss, they're not at risk of losing lean mass anyways, because this isn't a crazy rate of fat loss, and it is within the expected and effective rates of change based on a female 170 pounds. So there's minimal behavior change to nutrition. Literally no restrictions at all. You didn't have to give up anything. You didn't have to stop doing anything. You just had to start making some swaps to your current schedule and to your current meals. And this is literally no exercise changes. This is a person that's barely doing anything different with their life overall. There's nothing new that they have to adhere to. There are no rules. It's just a math equation. And they knew that some of the numbers created a better leverage than some of the other numbers. So they just made a couple of eyeball swaps really easily. And this is the new output that they created just from that. Understanding the math and where you can grab some leverage, you can barely change anything at all and create a wonderful situation for yourself uh, without any guilt or shame or overworking, trying super hard with whatever you're doing. This is just one example of how food math works. So next we'll do, I think, muscle building math and more exercise math. See you.